I stood in my grandmother's kitchen, a familiar scent of cinnamon and stale air hanging around me like a comforting blanket. Only this time, instead of childhood cookies baking in the oven, there were blister packs of pills lined up on the counter in neat, ominous rows. One for the morning, one for noon, two for the evening, and a special one that Gloria could only take if the pain became unbearable. Which was happening more and more often these days. The creaking of floorboards above my head announced Gloria's movement. I tilted my head, listening closely, waiting to determine if she needed help or was managing on her own. My grandmother had always been fiercely independent, and her illness hadn't changed that. If anything, it had crystallized that stubborn self-reliance into something harder, sharper. "Fiona. Are you down there?" Her voice trembled down the staircase, frail but insistent. "Coming, Gloria," I called back, abandoning the coffee I'd been brewing. My name is Fiona Thorne, and for the past 8 months, I had become my grandmother's primary caretaker. Not that anyone else in the family had volunteered for the role. My cousins had scattered to the winds when Gloria's diagnosis came, offering thoughts and prayers and sorry can't make it's delivered via text message. My uncles were too busy with their own lives. My father had been dead for 15 years. Which left me, 32, fresh off a brutal divorce, with a half-finished novel languishing on my laptop and a teaching job I'd put on indefinite hiatus. I'd moved into Gloria's sprawling Victorian house, sleeping in my old childhood bedroom with its faded constellation stickers still stuck to the ceiling. I found her in the upstairs bathroom, gripping the edge of the sink, her nightgown hanging loosely around her too-thin frame. "I'm afraid I've made a mess," she said, frustration evident in the tight line of her mouth. The medication she'd tried to take on her own had spilled across the white porcelain. Pills scattered like tiny candy pieces. "It's no problem." I kept my voice light, carefully gathering the pills. "You know you're supposed to call me for the morning dose." "I'm not an invalid yet," she snapped, then immediately softened. "I'm sorry, Fiona. I know." And I did. Gloria Webster had once been the matriarch of our family, a widow who'd built a real estate empire from the ground up after my grandfather's early death. She'd been the one who straightened everyone else's messes, not the one who made them. I helped her back to bed, tucking the quilt around her thinning shoulders. "Uncle Richard called this morning," I said casually, adjusting her pillows. "He wanted to know if you needed anything." Gloria's eyes, still sharp despite the illness ravaging her body, narrowed. "What he wants to know is how much longer until he can get his hands on the lake house." I didn't deny it. We both knew it was true. Richard, my father's older brother, had been dropping increasingly unsubtle hints about Gloria's property portfolio for months. The lakeside retreat in particular had been a source of family contention for years. Richard had always believed it should go to him, the eldest son. But Gloria had never been one for tradition over merit. "Did you call Harriet back?" Gloria asked, changing the subject. Harriet Keene, Gloria's attorney for the past 30 years, had become a regular presence in our lives as the illness progressed. Papers needed signing. Arrangements needed making. The reality of mortality needed addressing in legally binding documents. "Yes, she's coming by tomorrow afternoon." I smoothed Gloria's silver hair back from her forehead. "We can tackle whatever paperwork then." Gloria nodded, her eyelids already drooping from the medication I'd managed to get into her. "Good girl. Always responsible. Always here." The words hung in the air between us as she drifted off to sleep. They weren't just an observation, they were a contrast. Everyone knew it. I was the only one who had shown up. The only one who had stayed. The doorbell rang just as I was finishing the breakfast dishes. 2 short rings, then a longer one. I recognized the pattern immediately. My cousin Melanie's impatient finger had been pressing doorbells that way since we were children. I dried my hands and headed to the front door, mentally preparing myself. Melanie only showed up when she wanted something, and I had a sinking feeling I knew exactly what it was this time. "Fie," she exclaimed with excessive warmth when I opened the door. "God, you look tired. Are you sleeping at all?" Melanie Elliott, née Webster, looked like she'd just stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Her honey blonde hair was expertly highlighted. Her casual chic outfit probably cost more than I made in a month when I was still teaching, and her smile was Hollywood white. She was my Uncle Richard's only daughter and lived to remind everyone of her father's success and influence. "I manage," I replied, stepping aside to let her in. "Gloria's resting upstairs." "Oh, I didn't come to see Grandma." Melanie waved a manicured hand dismissively. "The kids get so upset, seeing her, like that." "I actually came to talk to you." That confirmed my suspicions. I led her to the kitchen, offering coffee more out of habit than hospitality. "Dad's getting the family together this weekend," she said, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. "A little dinner at his place. He wants to discuss, arrangements." "Arrangements." I kept my voice neutral as I poured coffee into Gloria's favorite ceramic mugs. "Gloria's still very much alive, Mel." Melanie at least had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. "Of course she is. We're just being practical. Making sure everyone's on the same page about expectations." "Expectations like who gets what?" I set a mug in front of her with more force than necessary, coffee sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Don't be like that, Fi." Melanie sweetened her coffee with 2 packets of artificial sweetener. "We all know Grandma's situation. The doctors gave her, what? 3 months? 4? They've been saying that for half a year," I countered, sitting down across from her. "Gloria's stronger than they think." "But not getting better," Melanie pointed out, her tone soft but her eyes calculating. "Dad just wants to ensure there are no surprises. No misunderstandings when the time comes." I took a sip of coffee to hide my expression. There was nothing Richard feared more than surprises when it came to his mother's estate. He'd been positioning himself as Gloria's faithful son and natural heir for decades, despite showing up for holidays and the occasional Sunday lunch at most. The fact that he was gathering the family now suggested he was getting nervous about something. "I'll see if Mrs. Patel can come sit with Gloria," I said finally. "But I can't stay long. She gets anxious when I'm not here for her evening medication." Melanie's smile was triumphant. "Perfect. 6 o'clock on Saturday." She reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "And Fi? Maybe we're something nice. Dad's invited some people from his firm." After she left, I stood at the kitchen window, watching her slide into her luxury SUV. The real reason for Richard's sudden family dinner was becoming clear. He wasn't just worried about Gloria's will, he was worried about me. About how much influence I might have gained over these months of caregiving. He wanted the family to present a united front, to remind Gloria that despite my dedication, they were still her blood, her legacy. Was that Melanie I heard? Gloria's voice came from behind me, startling me from my thoughts. I turned to find her standing in the doorway, leaning heavily on her walker but dressed properly for the day in one of her signature matching sets, this one a soft lavender that highlighted the silver of her hair. "You should have called me to help you down the stairs," I admonished gently. And miss the chance to eavesdrop? She shuffled toward the table. I may be dying, Fiona, but I'm not dead yet. And my hearing works just fine. I helped her into a chair, placing a fresh mug of coffee in front of her. Then you heard Richard's planning a family dinner. Oh yes. Gloria's lips curved into a smile that reminded me she hadn't always been a gentle grandmother. She'd been a businesswoman in an era when women weren't welcome in boardrooms. She'd had to be shrewd. Richard's getting nervous. About what? I asked, though I already suspected. Gloria's eyes met mine, sharp as ever. About what I'm going to do with everything I've built. The properties, the investments, the family legacy. She waved a thin hand around, encompassing the house and, by extension, all her considerable assets. He thinks if he parades the whole family in front of me, I'll remember my obligations. There was a moment of silence as we both sipped our coffee. You don't have obligations to anyone, Gloria, I said finally. It's your life's work. Your decision. She reached across the table, her cool fingers wrapping around mine with surprising strength. Remember that, Fiona. When they start circling like vultures. Remember that none of them is entitled to a single brick of what I built. I squeezed her hand gently. I know. No, Gloria said, her voice suddenly firmer. You don't. Not yet. But you will. Before I could ask what she meant, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway interrupted us. I glanced out the window to see Harriet Keene's sleek black sedan. She's early, I remarked, moving to put on a fresh pot of coffee. She's right on time, Gloria corrected, straightening in her chair. I called her this morning while you were in the shower. We have business to discuss. There was something in her tone, a determination, a finality, that sent a shiver of premonition up my spine. Whatever Gloria was planning, it seemed Richard's instincts were correct, changes were coming. And none of them knew what I had already learned in these quiet months of caring for her. Gloria Webster had always played the long game. And she wasn't finished playing yet. Richard's house was exactly what you would expect from a senior partner at one of the city's most prestigious law firms, a sprawling contemporary mansion in the most exclusive neighborhood, with perfectly manicured grounds and tasteful but obvious displays of wealth at every turn. I parked my modest sedan between a Range Rover and a Mercedes, feeling distinctly out of place. Mrs. Patel, a retired nurse who lived next door to Gloria, had agreed to stay with her for the evening. Still, I'd left with a knot of anxiety in my stomach. It had been months since I'd been away from Gloria for more than a few hours, and though I trusted Mrs. Patel implicitly, I couldn't shake the feeling that my absence was a betrayal. Fiona. You made it. Richard greeted me at the door with a glass of wine already poured. He was tall and distinguished, with the kind of silver hair that suggested wisdom rather than age, and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Where's your other half? It was a deliberate jab. My divorce from Marcus had been finalized just before Gloria's diagnosis, a fact that Richard never failed to reference. I left my other half in the divorce settlement, I replied, taking the wine. Along with my patience for pointed questions. Richard's smile tightened. Still sharp as ever, I see. Come in, everyone's here. Everyone turned out to be a bigger gathering than I had anticipated. In addition to Richard's family, Melanie, her husband Derek, and their 2 teenage children, there was my other uncle, Peter, with his much younger third wife whose name I could never remember. Several of Gloria's grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren were scattered throughout the enormous living room. And, true to Melanie's warning, at least half a dozen people who were obviously colleagues from Richard's firm were mingling with the family. "Quite the gathering for a family dinner," I remarked, sipping the expensive wine. "We're celebrating," Richard said, guiding me deeper into the room with a hand on my lower back that felt more possessive than polite. "Harrington and Wise is merging with a firm in New York. It's going to open up incredible opportunities." I nodded as if I cared about Richard's career trajectory. "And this required the entire Webster clan to be present?" "Family is everything, Fi." Richard's voice dropped to a more intimate level. "Speaking of which, how is Mother doing?" "Really?" I stepped away from his guiding hand. "She's hanging in there. Having good days and bad days." "And Harriet Keene?" "I heard she's been visiting regularly." There it was. The real reason for my summons. "Gloria's affairs are in order, if that's what you're asking," I said carefully. "She's very particular about her paperwork." Richard's practiced smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Of course. I just worry that in her condition, she might be susceptible to influence." Confusion. The implication hung in the air between us. "Gloria's mind is as sharp as ever," I replied, matching his smile with one of my own. "She knows exactly what she's doing." Before Richard could respond, Melanie appeared at his elbow. "Daddy, the Harringtons are asking for you." "Something about the Tokyo account?" Richard nodded, his attention diverted. "We'll continue this conversation later, Fiona. Help yourself to the buffet." As soon as he was out of earshot, Melanie's friendly facade dropped. "What are you doing, Fi?" "Having an incredibly awkward conversation with my uncle, apparently." "Don't play dumb." Melanie's voice was low, urgent. "We all know you've been whispering in Grandma's ear for months. Turning her against us." I stared at her, genuinely taken aback. "Is that really what you think I've been doing? While I'm changing her sheets and counting out her pills and holding her hand through chemo treatments?" Melanie had the grace to look momentarily ashamed, but she recovered quickly. "Look, no one's saying you haven't been helpful. We appreciate that you've been there." "Oh, you appreciate it? That's nice. Where's your appreciation been for the last 8 months, Mel? When was the last time you even visited her?" "I have children, Fiona. A husband. Responsibilities. And I don't. I put my entire life on hold to take care of Gloria." "Exactly." Melanie's voice rose slightly, drawing glances from nearby guests. She lowered it again, leaning in. "Your entire life. Which begs the question, what are you getting out of this?" The accusation stung all the more because of its absurdity. What was I getting out of watching the strongest woman I'd ever known wither away day by day? Out of measuring pain against consciousness in careful doses of morphine? Out of reading to her when her eyes were too tired to focus on the page? "Family takes care of family," I said finally, echoing Richard's earlier sentiment with considerably more sincerity. "Someone had to be there for her." Melanie's perfectly arched eyebrows rose. "And it just happened to be you? The one with no job, no husband, no real attachments? The perfect position to..." "To what, Mel?" "Spell it out." "To manipulate a sick old woman into changing her will." The words burst out of her, too loud for discretion. A hush fell over the nearest cluster of guests. I was aware of Richard turning in our direction, his face darkening. Something cold and hard settled in my chest. So that was what they all thought of me. The failed writer, the divorced teacher, the family charity case who had latched onto Gloria as a meal ticket. "You don't know anything about Gloria and me," I said, keeping my voice even with effort. You haven't bothered to be part of her life for years. Any of you. I looked around at the gathered family members, many of whom were suddenly very interested in their drinks or the carpet pattern. So don't pretend this is about protecting Gloria. This is about protecting what you think you're entitled to. I set my barely touched wine glass on a side table and turned to leave. Fiona, wait. Richard strode toward us, all smooth damage control. Melanie's just upset. We're all under stress with Mother's condition. No, I think Melanie was perfectly clear. And I think this entire evening was designed to send me a message. I met his gaze directly. Well, message received, Uncle Richard. But I'm not the one you should be worried about. His practiced smile faltered. What is that supposed to mean? I thought of Gloria at home, of the determined set of her jaw when Harriet Keene had laid out those papers on the dining room table, of the finality with which she'd signed her name. It means Gloria has always seen more than people give her credit for. And she's made her decisions accordingly. I left them standing there, speculation and alarm rippling through the assembled family members. As I drove home through the quiet streets, my anger gradually gave way to a bone-deep sadness. Not for myself, I had long ago accepted my place as the family outlier, but for Gloria. How lonely it must have been, to build so much, only to see it reduced to a feeding frenzy before she was even gone. When I arrived home, I found Mrs. Patel in the living room, reading quietly while Gloria slept in her adjustable bed that we'd set up on the ground floor to save her the stairs. How is she tonight? I whispered after Mrs. Patel had gathered her things. Peaceful, she replied. She asked about you several times. Wanted to make sure you weren't letting your uncle bully you. I smiled despite everything. That was Gloria, worried about me even as she battled her own much greater challenges. After Mrs. Patel left, I sat in the armchair beside Gloria's bed, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest. In sleep, the pain lines around her mouth softened, and I could almost see the formidable woman she had once been, the woman who, in a way, she still was. They think I'm after your money, I said softly to her sleeping form. As if that was ever what mattered between us. Gloria's eyes fluttered open, startling me. Of course they do, she murmured, her voice rough with sleep. They judge others by their own standards. I leaned forward, taking her thin hand in mine. I didn't mean to wake you. You didn't. I was waiting for you to come home. She struggled to sit up straighter, and I helped adjust her pillows. Tell me about the vultures convention. Despite everything, I laughed. It was exactly what you'd expect. Richard showing off his success, Melanie playing the devoted daughter, Peter pretending he visits you regularly. And their message to you? Stay away from Gloria's will. She nodded, unsurprised. And what did you tell them? That they've been absent while I've been here. That this isn't about money for me. Gloria's eyes, so like my father's had been, studied my face intently. But they didn't believe you. Would you, in their position? I asked wryly. The failed novelist turned caretaker, with nothing to her name except a half-empty apartment and a divorce settlement that barely covered the legal fees? You're more than your setbacks, Fiona. Gloria's grip on my hand tightened. You're the only one who saw me as more than a balance sheet. The only one who showed up without an agenda. I felt tears pricking at my eyes and blinked them back. I'm here because I love you. Because you were there for me after Dad died, after the divorce, after every time I fell. I know. She relaxed back against the pillows, fatigue evident in the slump of her shoulders. And that's why they'll never understand what I've done. A chill ran through me at her words. Gloria, what did you and Harriet discuss the other day? What have you done? But Gloria was already drifting back to sleep, her medication pulling her under. You'll see, she murmured, almost too soft to hear. You'll understand when the time comes. I sat there long after she'd fallen asleep, her enigmatic words echoing in my mind. Whatever Gloria had planned, it was clear that Richard's fears weren't entirely unfounded. Changes were coming, changes that would reverberate through the entire family. And somehow, I was at the center of them. 3 weeks later, Gloria took a sudden downturn. One moment she was sitting in her favorite armchair by the window, commenting on the neighbors' recent landscaping choices. The next, she was struggling to breathe, her lips taking on a bluish tint that sent me racing for the phone. The ambulance came quickly, but by the time we reached the hospital, Gloria was barely conscious. The doctors spoke in hushed, urgent tones about pneumonia, about the cancer's progression, about how her body was too weakened to fight anymore. I called Richard first, then Peter. Within hours, the hospital waiting room was filled with family members who had been conspicuously absent for months. Melanie came with tear-streaked makeup that looked almost practiced. Richard paced the hallway, making important-sounding calls about Gloria's condition to people who had never once visited her. Peter sat quietly in a corner, his young wife looking distinctly uncomfortable among the genuine grief. None of them went into Gloria's room. None of them wanted to see her hooked up to machines, her dignity stripped away by hospital gowns and 4 lines. I moved between Gloria's bedside and the waiting room, delivering updates, accepting hollow hugs, fielding questions about Gloria's comfort that masked deeper questions about her estate. On the 3rd day, the doctor took me aside. "We've made her as comfortable as possible," he said gently. "But at this point, we're just prolonging the inevitable. It might be time to say goodbye." I nodded, numb with exhaustion and grief. "I'll tell the family." In the waiting room, all conversation stopped as I entered. Richard stepped forward, his face arranged in an expression of grave concern. "The doctor thinks it's time," I said simply. Melanie made a small, choked sound. One of the cousins began to quietly weep. Richard put his arm around his daughter, the picture of a family patriarch providing strength in difficult times. "We should go in together," Richard declared. "As a family. To say our goodbyes." I almost laughed at the absurdity of it, this sudden display of family unity after months of absence. But I was too tired for bitterness. "She's heavily sedated," I warned. "She probably won't respond." They filed into Gloria's room like somber mourners at a viewing, keeping a safe distance from the bed where she lay. The only sound was the rhythmic beeping of monitors and the hiss of oxygen. Richard approached first, taking Gloria's limp hand in his. "Mother," he said, his voice breaking just enough to be convincing. "We're all here. Your family." For a moment, I thought Gloria would remain unresponsive. But then her eyes fluttered open, cloudy with medication but still alert enough to scan the assembled faces. "All come to see me off," she rasped, her voice barely audible above the machines. Richard squeezed her hand. "Don't talk like that. We're here for you. All of us." Gloria's gaze drifted past him, finding me standing at the foot of the bed. A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Fiona's been here all along." The words hung in the air, a quiet rebuke that no one dared acknowledge. "We've all been so worried." Melanie stepped forward, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "The children send their love." Gloria's expression didn't change, but her hand slipped from Richard's grasp. "I'm tired," she whispered. Just want Fiona now." The family exchanged glances, a mixture of concern and resentment passing between them. But they couldn't very well argue with a dying woman's wishes. "Of course, Mother," Richard said smoothly. "We'll be right outside if you need anything." He ushered everyone out, stopping to give me a meaningful look before he closed the door behind them. Alone with Gloria, I moved to the chair beside her bed, taking her hand in mine. Her skin was paper-thin, blue veins visible beneath the surface. "Did you see them all?" she asked, her voice stronger now that the performance was over. "Vultures, just like I said." Despite everything, I smiled. "They're just paying their respects, Gloria. They're making sure I see them here. Making a show of family loyalty." She struggled to take a deeper breath. "But where were they when I needed someone to hold my hair back during chemo? Where were they during the long nights when the pain was so bad I couldn't sleep?" "Try not to upset yourself," I urged, adjusting her oxygen tube. "It doesn't matter now." "It matters very much." Her fingers tightened around mine with surprising strength. "Harriet will be coming tomorrow. There are things you need to know. Don't worry about that now. Just rest." Gloria's eyes, still sharp despite the haze of medication, fixed on mine. "Promise me one thing, Fiona." "Anything." "When they show their true colors, and they will, don't let them make you doubt yourself. Don't let them make you feel guilty for receiving what you've earned." A chill ran down my spine. "Gloria, what are you talking about?" But she had closed her eyes, either unwilling to explain further or too exhausted to continue. I sat with her as she drifted back to sleep, her cryptic words echoing in my mind. Outside in the hallway, I could hear the family's hushed conversations, punctuated by Richard's authoritative tone as he no doubt made arrangements, took control, played the role of devoted son for all to see. I leaned back in the uncomfortable hospital chair, suddenly understanding with perfect clarity what Gloria had been trying to tell me for weeks. This wasn't just about who would inherit her material possessions. This was about legacy, about truth, about seeing people for who they really were. Gloria had been watching us all for years, watching who showed up, who cared, who was there for the right reasons. And she had been making her judgments accordingly. Whatever storm was coming, I had a feeling I was standing directly in its path. Gloria passed away peacefully in her sleep 3 days later. I was holding her hand, reading aloud from one of her favorite books, when the monitors began to alarm. The medical team rushed in, but it was too late. She was gone. The family activated immediately, as if following a long-rehearsed script. Richard took charge of the funeral arrangements, Melanie organized the reception, Peter handled the obituary. I was gently but firmly sidelined, consulted as a courtesy but otherwise excluded from the decision-making. I didn't fight it. I was too exhausted, too grief-stricken to argue about flower arrangements or which photo of Gloria should be displayed at the service. Let them have their performance of family unity. I knew the truth, and more importantly, Gloria had known it too. The funeral was exactly what you would expect for someone of Gloria's stature: elaborate floral displays, a string quartet playing her favorite classical pieces, eulogies from community leaders who praised her business acumen and philanthropic efforts. Richard delivered a moving speech about his mother's influence on his life and career. Melanie read a poem she claimed was Gloria's favorite, though I had never once heard Gloria mention it. I sat in the front row, accepting condolences from people I barely knew, watching the family perform their grief with practiced precision. It all felt surreal, as if I were observing a play about someone else's grandmother. Only when I returned to Gloria's empty house did the reality truly hit me. The silence was oppressive, her absence a physical presence in every room. I wandered from her bedroom to her study, touching the things she had touched, breathing in the fading scent of her perfume. On her desk, I found a sealed envelope with my name written on it in her distinctive handwriting. Inside was a short note. Fiona. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Know that the months you gave me at the end were the greatest gift anyone has ever given me. Not just the care, but the company. The honesty. The love without conditions or expectations. Harriet knows my wishes. Trust her, and trust yourself. All my love. Gloria. I traced my fingers over the words, tears blurring my vision. It was so typically Gloria, direct, unsentimental, yet profound in its simplicity. The doorbell interrupted my thoughts. I wiped my eyes and went to answer it, finding Harriet Keene on the porch, her professional demeanor softened slightly by what appeared to be genuine grief. Fiona, she said warmly. I hope I'm not intruding on your morning. Not at all, I assured her, stepping aside to let her in. I was just reading a note Gloria left for me. Harriet nodded, unsurprised. She was always thinking ahead. Planning for every eventuality. In the living room, Harriet set her briefcase on the coffee table and extracted a thick folder. Gloria asked me to come see you privately before the official reading of the will. There are things she wanted you to know first. A sense of foreboding settled over me. Richard's been calling you, hasn't he? About the will. Richard, Peter, half a dozen cousins, Harriet confirmed with a wry smile. Everyone wants to know where they stand. But Gloria was very specific about her instructions. She opened the folder and took out a document, handing it to me. This is a copy of Gloria's will as it stood 3 years ago, before her illness. You'll notice that it divides her estate relatively equally among family members, with the bulk going to Richard and Peter as her sons, and the rest distributed among grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I skimmed the document, noting the careful allocations of property and assets. It was fair, reasonable, exactly what everyone in the family would have expected. And this, Harriet continued, extracting another, thicker document, is Gloria's final will, executed 4 months ago and reaffirmed just 3 weeks ago during my visit here. With trepidation, I took the papers, my eyes widening as I read the first page. This can't be right, I murmured, flipping through the pages with increasing disbelief. She left everything to me? Harriet nodded, her expression serious. The house, the investment portfolio, the property holdings, including the lake house Richard has been eyeing for decades. All of it transferred to you, with only nominal bequests to the rest of the family. I sat down heavily, the documents trembling in my hands. They'll contest it. They'll say I manipulated her, that she wasn't of sound mind. Gloria anticipated that. Harriet reached into her briefcase again and produced a sealed envelope. This is a video recording of Gloria explaining her decision, made in my presence and witnessed by 2 independent medical professionals who certified her mental competence. She specifically addresses the family's likely accusations and refutes them. I stared at the envelope, understanding now the full weight of Gloria's cryptic warnings. They're going to hate me. Perhaps, Harriet acknowledged. But Gloria didn't make this decision lightly. She watched for years as her family drifted away, only to circle back when they wanted something. The only person who was there consistently, without an agenda, was you. I didn't do it for this, I said, gesturing to the will. I never expected. She knew that. Harriet's voice softened. That's precisely why she did it. Because you were the only one who wasn't there for what you could get out of it. I sat in silence, trying to process what this would mean. The family would be furious. Richard, especially, would see this as a personal betrayal, a theft of what he considered his birthright. The official reading is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at my office, Harriet said, gathering her papers. I wanted you to be prepared for what's coming. Gloria was adamant that you shouldn't be blindsided by their reactions. After Harriet left, I sat in Gloria's favorite chair, looking out at the garden she had tended so carefully for decades. The rosebushes needed pruning. The hydrangeas were beginning to bloom. Life continued even in her absence. I thought about calling Richard, warning him somehow, but what would I say? How could I explain a decision that wasn't mine to justify? In the end, I did nothing. Gloria had made her choice. She had her reasons. And tomorrow, everyone would know what they were. Night fell, and I moved through the house that was now legally mine, touching the photographs on the mantelpiece, the books on the shelves, the delicate teacups in the china cabinet. None of it felt like mine. It still felt like Gloria's, as if she might walk through the door at any moment, complaining about the neighbor's cat or asking me to read to her. But she wouldn't. She was gone. And she had left me with not just her possessions, but with the burden of her final judgment on the family that had failed her. "Oh, Gloria," I whispered to the empty house. "What have you done?" Harriet Keene's law office was located in a historic building downtown, its wood-paneled conference room projecting exactly the kind of old-money solidity that Gloria had always appreciated. I arrived early, unable to face the prospect of walking in after the family had assembled. Harriet greeted me with a sympathetic smile. "Are you ready for this?" I nodded, though in truth I felt anything but ready. "As I'll ever be. Remember, this is Gloria's decision, not yours. You have nothing to feel guilty about." "Try telling them that," I murmured as the first family members began to arrive. Richard came in with Melanie and Derek, all three dressed in somber business attire that suggested they expected to be photographed for a financial magazine. Peter followed shortly after with his wife, whose name I had finally learned was Kylie. Cousins, grandchildren, and various in-laws trickled in until the room was full of Webster family members, all wearing expressions of appropriate grief mixed with barely disguised anticipation. Richard took the seat at the head of the table opposite Harriet, positioning himself as the natural patriarch now that Gloria was gone. He nodded to me coolly as he sat. "Fiona. Good to see you holding up," he said, his voice carrying just enough sympathy to seem appropriate while his eyes assessed me like an opponent across a chessboard. Harriet called the meeting to order, her practiced professionalism filling the room as she explained the purpose of the gathering. I felt the weight of 24 pairs of eyes on me as she began to read Gloria's will. The controlled shock that rippled through the room when Harriet announced my inheritance was almost palpable. Richard's face transformed from confident expectation to stunned disbelief to cold fury in the space of seconds. Melanie gasped audibly, her manicured hand flying to her throat in theatrical dismay. "This is preposterous," Richard finally sputtered, interrupting Harriet mid-sentence. Mother was not in her right mind. Fiona clearly took advantage. I anticipated this reaction, Harriet cut in smoothly, sliding a tablet toward the center of the table. Gloria prepared a video statement explaining her decisions. Gloria's face appeared on the screen, thinner than in her prime but with eyes clear and determined. Her voice, firm despite her illness, filled the stunned silence of the room. "To my family," she began, "if you're watching this, then you've just learned that I've left my estate to Fiona. You're angry. You feel cheated. You're already planning to contest this will." She paused, her mouth curving into the familiar wry smile I'd grown to love. But before you embarrass yourselves with accusations about Fiona's influence, understand this: I've spent years watching who shows up when it matters. Only Fiona passed that test. As Gloria's final judgment echoed through the room, I met Richard's venomous glare with a calm certainty I hadn't known I possessed. This wasn't just an inheritance, it was Gloria's last lesson about the true meaning of family, not what you're entitled to, but what you earn through love.